What's going on, everyone? I'm Matt from Universal Audio, and today I'm going to show you how to get killer podcasting, live streaming, and voiceover recordings using UAD plugins and Apollo's console application. Now I'm going to show you these tips on the SD1 dynamic microphone, but these tips apply to any type of microphone that you might be using. And if you do own the SD1, there are a bunch of awesome factory presets that you can download at the link in the description below. Let's dive in and check out how to set up a custom channel strip preset for your mic. Alright, so now you're hearing me speak through the SD1 microphone with no plugin processing, just through the Apollo preamp. Whenever you're starting to build a vocal chain like this, a good place to start is at the source. And with the SD1 microphone, there are two dip switches on the back of the mic that let you tailor the sound before you even get into the computer. There's a high pass switch, which rolls off the low end, gets rid of things like mic stand rumble and that kind of thing. There's also a presence boost, which does a slight boost around 3 to 5K, which is where a lot of the articulation in your voice is. So it just brings out the clarity in your voice, makes it a little easier to understand, and makes it easier to hear you over whatever you're speaking over. So on my particular voice, I like the dip switches set flat. I like to do all my boosting and cutting with plugins in the computer, but definitely play around with the different settings to see what you like on your mic and with your voice. So now let's dive into plugin processing, and I'm going to start with the preamp. The preamp does two things for you. For one, it boosts up the signal to a usable level, but it also gives you character and tone, which is something that the Unison UAD preamp plugins are really good at. There's all different kinds of Unison preamp plugins that have different features and sound different. I recommend trying them out to see what you like on your voice and your mic. In my particular case, I really like the SSLE channel strip. I like the feature set that it has, and I also really like the way it sounds on my voice with this particular microphone. So I'm going to load up the SSLE, then I'll dial in the gain so you can hear me again, and we'll pick it back up. All right, so now you're hearing me talk through the SSLE channel strip preamp. I pretty much just turn up the gain so you can hear me, and let me break down what I did here. First, you have the input preamp stage of the plugin. This is where you get a lot of your tone from. So if you drive this really hard, you're going to get some nice saturation and distortion, and if you back off, you're going to get a cleaner sound. In my particular case, I have it set high enough where I'm getting a little bit of bite from the preamp, but not so high that it's getting saturated and distorted. So that's what I want in this case. The next gain stage that we have in the SSLE is the fader here, which controls the output amplifier level. You can get some more color out of this gain stage if you drive it harder, but I don't want to get any more color from this preamp in this case, so I'm going to leave it at 0. And the final gain stage that we have in this plugin is the output knob here. This is a fully digital, clean gain stage. It doesn't affect the tone of the signal at all. It just sets the output from the plugin. So I'm using it to get the level that I want, and then I'm pretty much done with the gain staging here. You might notice that these knobs are turned up pretty high, which is pretty standard for this type of broadcast microphone. They do need a lot of gain. So if you do need to turn your knobs up pretty high like this, definitely don't worry about it. It's pretty normal. Just make sure you're using your ears to make sure that you're not getting any kind of distortion or saturation that you don't want. One of the other reasons I really like this plugin is the built-in gate. It's really good for reducing background noise in your signal that you might not want. If you're like me, you might be recording in a bedroom and you have AC noise, computer fan noise, window noise. The gate is really good for just stripping all those things out and helping you get a cleaner recording. So there's 3 different gate modes in the SSLE. I like the expander mode. That sounds the most natural. So the 2 main controls you're going to want to worry about here are the range control and the threshold. The range sets the amount of attenuation that happens when the signal drops below the threshold. So in this case, I'm going to set it around 10 dB. I find that's a good middle of the road setting that works for most things. It doesn't deaden the signal too much where it sounds unnatural, but it still gives you the effect you're looking for. And then I'm going to use the threshold to dial in basically the point at which the gate opens up. So I have it set at -20 right now. That means when my voice crosses above -20, the gate opens up and no attenuation is happening. You can hear me. And when the signal drops below -20, the attenuation kicks in, which you can see happening with the LEDs right here. So now I've got the SSLE set up how I want it. We've got the gain stages all dialed in. We have the gate turned on, so it's reducing some of our background noise. The next place I'm going to go here is some corrective processing, and I'm going to use a de-esser, basically just to even out the S sounds in my voice, make them a little more easier to listen to and a little less harsh. So I'm going to load up the precision de-esser in the first insert slot here, and we'll take a look at the settings. So one of the things that I really like about the precision de-esser is the default settings are really, really useful. In many cases, I find I don't need to change them from the default. All I really do is come in here and turn down the threshold until I start getting the amount of gain reduction that I want. And I'm usually looking for around 5 to 7 dB of gain reduction, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And you'll notice that the meter responds when I say words with S sounds, such as sibilants. It's basically just targeting those particular frequencies, mellowing them out so they're not as harsh, while keeping the rest of the vocal intact. So it's just making those S sounds pop out less and making my vocal a little bit easier to listen to. All right, so next we're going to set up CVOX, which is a real-time noise reduction plugin. This plugin is really cool because it's intelligently analyzing your signal at all times and only reducing the noise from the signal while letting your voice through. So it doesn't change the tone of your voice too much. It still sounds pretty natural, but it's really good at reducing noise that might be in the signal. So there's two main controls you're going to want to worry about here, which is ambience and attenuation. So ambience controls how much ambience is let through to the noise reduction process. If you have it set to 100, all the ambience is going to come through. You're going to get the full room sound. And if you have it set to 0, it's going to strip all the ambience out of your signal, which might sound a little unnatural and too deadened. So I find that 80 is usually a pretty good setting. Lets enough ambience through where it still sounds natural, but it just tightens the space up around the mic a little bit. Once you get the ambience dialed in, the only thing left to do is dial in the attenuation, which basically controls how much real-time noise reduction is happening. I find that 40 is a pretty good setting. It's reducing noise, but not too much where it's unnaturally deadening the signal. And you'll notice when I stop talking, this signal graph kind of goes into the negative as it's reducing the level of that noise. And as soon as I start talking again, it opens up and lets the full sound of my voice through. So it's really cool because it's constantly analyzing the signal and reducing just the noise, but not changing the tone of your voice. Cool, so now that we've dialed in our corrective processing with the precision de-esser and CVOX, we're going to move on to some EQ. And I really like the sound of the EQ-P1A by Pultec, so let's load that up in the third insert here. So I'm going to use the EQ-P1A for some gentle tone shaping here. I'm basically just going to boost the highs a little bit to give me some more articulation in my voice, and I'm going to cut the lows just a tiny bit to tighten things up a bit. So let's start by changing the high band to 3K. Anywhere from 3 to 5K is usually where the articulation is in the voice. Depends on your voice and your mic though, however, so definitely play around with different settings to see what works for you. And I'm going to change the bandwidth here to be more on the broad side. I kind of want these gentle, broad curves that sound a little bit more musical and a little less intrusive. And then once I get that dialed in, I'm just going to add a little bit of 3K boost, and this is just going to bring out a little bit of articulation in my voice just to make things clearer and easier to understand. Once I get that dialed in, the next thing I'm going to do is change the low frequency band to 60 Hertz. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of attenuation, just about the same amount of boost that I added on the high band. So it's just going to tighten things up a little bit, reduce some mud, and make everything easier to understand. Cool, so I've got the EQ-P1A dialed in the way I want it. Things are sounding pretty good in my headphones. The last thing that I'm going to dial in here is some compression. And I'm just going to do some light compression with an LA2A, which is one of the easiest compressors to set up and one of the best sounding compressors for this type of vocal work. So let's load the LA2A in the fourth insert here. Like I mentioned, the LA2A is one of the easiest plugins to dial in. There's just two knobs. There's one knob for peak reduction, which controls the amount of compression. If I turn this up, I'm going to get more compressed. If I turn it down, I'm going to get less compressed. I usually like to dial this in, so I'm getting anywhere from 1 to 2 dB of compression, maybe 3 dB when I say something particularly loud, but I don't really want to go past that because that's when it starts sounding a little unnatural, a little too compressed. So the only other control you really need to worry about with an LA2A is this gain knob here, and this just sets the final output level from the plugin. And since it's the last plug in the chain, it also sets the final output level from the chain itself. So you can see in the meter down here, I'm actually getting a pretty healthy level. It's not too low, it's not too loud, I'm not clipping. So I'm going to leave the gain knob alone. But if your signal is too low, you can turn this gain knob up. If your signal is too loud, you can turn it down. It basically just sets the final output level from the chain to make sure that you're recording at a healthy level into your recording software, your live streaming software, or whatever you might be using. All right, so now that I've got the LA2A dialed in the way I want it, I'm really happy with how my vocal chain is sounding. It's nice and even, it's easy to understand, it sounds polished and professional. So now I want to save this as a channel strip preset so I can recall it later to get the same sound every time I go to record. The way you do that in console is click the inserts label at the top of the channel here, and I'm going to click save and name my preset. All right, now that I've got this saved as a channel strip preset, I can recall it from any other console channel, and it's a really great way to get predictable results every time I go to record. I know that if I'm using this microphone and this vocal chain, I'm going to get the same sound every time. So it really takes the guesswork out of the setup, and it really cuts down on setup time in general. Play around with different settings to find something that works for your voice, saves the channel strip preset, and don't forget, if you do own the SD1 microphone, you can download those factory presets, the link in the description below. Subscribe to the Universal Audio YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future videos, and we'll see you next time.